You're tuned in to Porch Talk with Rev Pat, where raw, real talk rules. So sit back and relax with that delicious cup of coffee or tea or your favorite glass of wine as Rev Pat delivers real, transparent, and raw conversations about all things life. Let's get started.
Welcome to your newest episode. Y'all know what I'm talking about, of Porch Talk. I am so blessed. I'm your host, Rev Pat. So blessed to have you with me. Joining me on the porch today, I have Sandy Phillips Kirkham. You're going to want to tune in to this episode of Porch Talk. She is an advocate and speaker on clergy, sexual abuse, and misconduct. That ought to make you stay. That alone ought to make you stay. But she's also the author of the book, Let Me Pray on You, P-R-E-Y. Notate the wording, P-R-E-Y. We are going to talk about her experience as someone who was abused by clergy, and we're going to delve deep into a conversation about why we don't acknowledge this and why are we so uncomfortable in the church talking about this issue when we know that she is not alone. So grab your coffee, grab your tea, even your glass of wine. You might just need it, and let's get talking. Miss Sandy, let me tell you, I, on behalf of myself, as a leader in the body of Christ, I always find myself when I meet someone who has had to deal with church hurt, apologize, because I think that goes a long way in the healing process, that we recognize and apologize on the behalf of those that should have been trusted with our spiritual growth. So on behalf of myself, I apologize. I know the responsibility that we should have with those that are under shepherds in God's body, in the body of Christ, and there's a deep responsibility. My husband is a pastor, and it would devastate me if anything should happen, which I know it wouldn't, but if it did, it would devastate me. So I can imagine the devastation not only with you, and the devastation that it probably caused with his family, if any. So thank you for being, I told you, I feel like this is very courageous of you, very courageous. There are a couple of things that we're going to talk about specifically, but please tell everyone about you and let's just talk.
Well, I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio. I've lived here all of my life. I'm married to my husband for 43 years. We have 2 grown children and 2 perfect granddaughters, and
did y'all know she said that's a grandmama right there? 2 perfect granddaughters
and 2 fairly well-behaved dogs, fairly behaved. and the onus on that is on the owners, not the dogs.
Okay,
they're good dogs, bad owners. So I have a great life right now. I'm very happy in my life where I am, but that wasn't the way my life had always taken the turns. And so that's what brought me here today, is my story.
Tell your story.
I was someone who started attending church when I was about 8 years old. My family did not attend church. My parents were divorced, but my neighbor friend asked me to visit with her. I did, and I loved everything about it. And I went there as much as I could go. I was 8 years old. I went to church camp, Vacation Bible School. I was in Sunday school, and I loved every aspect of it. As I got older, I started teaching Sunday school. I started singing in the choir. I started leading retreats. Basically, if the doors were open, I was there. And it was a place that I just loved. I found, with my parents' divorce, I was looking for a place to land, and church provided that for me. It was a wonderful place for me. People surrounded me with love and acceptance. When I turned 16, our church hired a new youth pastor. And when he arrived, he was very different than any pastor we'd seen before. He was very charismatic. He was very dynamic. His sermons were spectacular. People flocked to the church to come see him and hear him. And this was before mega churches, but our church started growing because of the presence of this pastor. And he was the youth pastor. So even though he was 30 and married with 2 children, he dressed more like us. He wore cut-off jeans. He had sideburns. In the 70s, you would call him hip.
Yeah.
He was hip. He drove a convertible. I mean, everything about him was just different. And he obviously tapped into me to be one of the leaders of the youth group. And, and I felt very special. I thought this was great that he was going to put me as one of the leaders in the youth group. About 3 months after his arrival, we had a youth group meeting in my home, and he waited for everyone to leave. And after everyone was gone, he took me into my hallway and he started telling me how special I was and how much he appreciated all the work I was doing in the church. And then he bent down and he kissed me. And I remember I was stunned because it was kind of like a quick, innocent kiss. So I wasn't sure what it was, but I thought he just kissed me, I think, but he's my pastor and he wouldn't be doing anything he shouldn't be doing. And then I kind of felt guilty for thinking anything bad about him. So I thought, well, this is just his way of showing appreciation. He was very demonstrative, always hugging people, telling them that he loved them. So this wasn't totally out of his character, but I did think it was odd, but I let it go. I babysat for his family. His wife worked evenings. So that gave him the perfect opportunity to be alone with me. And he would spend time with me after the kids were in bed, telling me, giving me books to read on spirituality, telling me he wanted me to grow spiritually. He would read Bible verses. We'd talk about the church. None of this really seemed out of line to me because he was my pastor. But this continued for about a year, and that was the grooming process. And so the kissing started to intensify a little bit. And then about a year later, I was 17, he took me into the living room and he put me on the floor and he began undressing me. And I froze. I absolutely froze because I kept thinking, surely he's going to stop. He's going to stop. But he didn't. And I didn't know what to do. And I described this in my book as literally, I wanted to think about anything else other than what was happening to me at that moment. He took me up and he took me up into the bedroom. I remember the light was on and I kept thinking, please turn the light off. And he didn't. I knew then having sex with me was wrong. I could justify the kissing to some extent, but this I knew was wrong. Right. But he immediately went into this mode of, you can't tell anyone, no one's going to understand. This is our special relationship. This is God's will. And I was confused. And of course I looked up to him and I thought the world of him. And I didn't want to hurt him. So I did no other thing than just to go along with what he was telling me. I was just in a confused state. And then he called me the next day to say, are you okay? Because I want you to know how important this relationship is. And this is God's will, and you're helping me in my ministry. And so, I didn't know what else to do with it. He threatened me to some extent to say that I couldn't tell anyone because no one would believe me. And that I knew would happen. I just knew.
I mean, that's true of any. I'm a survivor, and I know exactly. And even worse, I saw my abuser every day until I graduated high school. And I don't know if you've never been in that situation. Let me say this before we go any further. If you've never been in a situation, either pastor or family friend or anyone, where you have had this experience, there are no words for the fear. There are no words for the guilt that you feel. The person that was my rapist was a very popular person, and I was a nerd. Nobody would have believed on any stretch of my imagination would anybody have thought that were possible. Right. So I want to clarify that because I've been in situations where I've heard people say things after hearing something about a person being abused or raped, and the response was so insensitive as to how did she let it happen? Why did she do this? Why didn't she do that? Your mind is not there. Your mind is not in that place because at this point you are stunned because it's usually someone you know. Right. You're stunned and it is unexpected. And on top of all of this, you're violated. Your life just changed as you know it.
And also one act. These perpetrators look for someone they know is going to acquiesce to them more so than someone else. So they look for the child or the adult who's in a vulnerable place in their life, maybe low self-esteem, or they've got a crisis in their life. they tend to look for someone, and then they use that grooming process to test them, the setup, to see, how far can I go with this person, and how far will they let me continue to break down boundaries, so that the trust is so great there. And because, again, as you pointed out, this is a person that's usually beloved by those around them, that you truly think, first of all, I didn't want anyone to know something that I had done. This was something that I saw myself doing. Why didn't I say no? Why couldn't I? Because we don't have the coping skills at that moment to be able to say no to a person in a position of power over us. It's an adult. We don't have the capability to be able to voice that sign to say no. And you're so right, because people don't understand why we let this happen. Why did you let it happen? And in my case, the abuse lasted for 5 years.
Oh my God.
So
that's right. It did. It lasted for 5 years.
Yeah.
And for those of you that don't understand what she's saying, let me tell you, if you think that you all question, why did we let it happen? We question ourselves.
Right.
Far more than you even imagine. There was always the question after, for me, why did I get in the car? Why didn't I just wait for something else? Or why didn't I just walk home? Why did I, but this was someone I trusted. So it wasn't anything that I thought would happen.
Even a possibility. Yeah.
So at the same time, this is my pastor, y'all. This is a youth pastor. I babysit his kids. He's got a wife. He's got children, and I trust him. So please, please, please hear her, and please, if nothing else, consider this. If you have a child that is active in church, they feel the same way about the leaders. Maybe that'll give you pause. They feel the very same way that she felt at 17, 16 about the youth leader and the youth pastor and let me just say, all of the people that they consider leaders within their church. We look up to them. My daughters look up to those that are considered leaders in our body.
And we're not taught to question, those in charge. So we're not even taught to question it. It's like, like I said, I felt almost guilty for thinking, okay, I think he shouldn't be doing this, but it's my pastor, so it must be okay, without, any other thought. So, for me, once he crossed that line of sexual intercourse, he became a different person. He became controlling. He became emotionally abusive to me. He became violent. He hit me several times. He was almost a different person. And I felt trapped. That's how I felt. I felt trapped. And I didn't know how to get out of the situation. I knew that I couldn't tell anyone, again, because I'm thinking this would be a bombshell in the church if people thought this were even true about this man. And secondly, I didn't want them to think this about me, because I would be exposing myself as well. And so for me, it meant just keeping the secret and going along with whatever it was he wanted me to do. And in between those times of abuse, there was also moments of how much he loved me and how much he needed me. And, this was God's will. And he was just like David in the Bible. And all of that being added on top
whoa, David?
Yeah.
Why David?
Because David, with Bathsheba, and he ended up being, King David eventually, and God spared him. And well, he didn't spare him totally, but that's a common thread that many pastors will use, that they're like, wow, King David in the Bible, and that God forgave King David. Therefore, his line was that God works through me in spite of my faults. That was what he would tell me, because he was. If you looked at his works in the church, as false as they were, we were growing. It was a dynamic church. People were coming in. He looked like he was doing all the right things. And that's the other thing, a point I bring up to people is, they not only groom and manipulate the victim, but they also groom and manipulate the congregation, because they need their cheerleaders around them. They need their rah-rah people, so that if they're ever exposed, they've got a support system already built in.
Wow, let me stop you, because that is so crazy. The young lady that I was referring to earlier, wow, what you just described is what she went through. Because when it did come out, oh, they were all on his side.
Oh yeah. Yes, it
Wow.
happens a
I
lot.
never thought about it from the perspective of he not only grooming his victim, but grooming the congregation.
Oh,
So that
absolutely.
if
Mhm.
if it is, because you'd have to think that somewhere in that person's mind, there is the thought that I got to be prepared. There's got to be an exit plan or strategy if I'm exposed. You can't just think that you just going,
Right. And think about it. These are the people, that's who they are. They are manipulators. That's who they are anyway. So they're going to manipulate everyone around them. It's not that even if it's just an exit strategy, it's just that's who they are. They're not the trustworthy person that they appear to be. These men are, and sometimes women, are calculating in their actions. These aren't, this just is a mistake that they made. As I said, they target their victims, they look for easy prey, and then they control that person to a point that they see no way out of the relationship. And it's only over when the abuser says it's over. It never, it's so seldom that the victim is able to find her way out. And I tell people, just because there is a way out doesn't mean a victim can see the way out. And when you add to the tools that these men and women use, whether it's the love bombing, grooming, the gaslighting, the manipulation, all of those things control the victim to a point where she can no longer think clearly for herself. Her ability to think is compromised by the trauma and the abuse. She's not thinking like a person who's not being abused.
right.
So she can't think clearly enough to know that, yes, I can tell someone. But in my case, his actions were finally discovered and he was called into the elders. He was given his version of what happened. I don't know what he told them. I do know that he told them I was older than 16 when it happened and that it had only been going on for a year, and they believed him. No one asked me any questions. I was told where to sit in church. I was told how to behave. I was told what to do if someone asked me a question, because the whole goal then was to move him to the next church without letting anyone in the congregation find out. And so when that started occurring, people started wondering why he was leaving all of a sudden. People started noticing things. And at some point, it began to be known in the congregation that something had been going on. But no one ever asked me any questions. And every bit of support was given to him. I can name 5 people that were on my side out of a church of 700 people. And so
Wow.
it was.
But I want you to go back. You were told where to sit.
Well, they didn't want it to look suspicious. So they didn't want me. I always sat in the same place at church, like a lot of people do.
Yeah.
So sit in the same place you always sit, make sure if someone asks you questions, this is what you need to tell them. You go to the elders. Now, this will probably really shock you, but they also told me that I was not to tell my parents. I was not to tell my parents. And he also told me, please don't tell your parents, because I know that they were afraid of their reaction. And so I didn't. But at some point when rumors started happening, I remember calling him and saying to him, I need to tell my parents because someone's going to tell them and I don't want them to find out that way. And I had framed it that I was having an affair with this married pastor. That's how I saw it. So for me, I didn't see it as abuse. I simply saw that he had had an affair with this woman in his church. So at one point, after he was moved to the next church, about 3 months later, I was called in by the elders, and I was told that because of my behavior, I was to leave the church. And I was devastated. I was absolutely devastated. I loved that church. It was the only church I'd ever known. And I believed that everything I'd been taught, I believed in forgiveness. They had forgiven him. He was moved to the next church, and I was told I was unfit to worship there. And it was, even to this moment of telling you that, hurts me to my core. And
See, oh my God, that is what really blows my mind.
And I told people that, his abuse was horrific. I mean, as I said, it was emotional and physical, and it lasted for 5 years. But the church telling me I had to leave probably had more of a devastating effect on my life going forward than his actual abuse did. And it would be 27 years before I would ever tell that secret to anyone. My husband never knew, my close friends never knew. And I spent 27 years feeling guilty for something I thought I had done. I spent 27 years fearful that someone would find out. I spent 27 years trying to hide the secret. When I'd have a trigger that would force me into an anxiety attack, I had to pretend that I was okay. And that's how I lived my life for 27 years. I went to church, but I didn't engage at all. I wanted my children to have that experience, but I never listened to a prayer. I closed my mind when a Bible verse was read. I simply read so that my children could have that experience. Pat, every time I walked past a minister's office, I would get a knot in my stomach every time, and it would pass and I'd let it go. But that's how I lived my life for 27 years until a trigger factor stopped me in my tracks cold and said, you're going to have to deal with this. You have to deal with your past. And that's what started me then on that second part of my journey, which was to understand what was done to me and how I was going to heal from it.
Look, let me tell you, for those of us listening, man, I can relate to you in so many ways. It wasn't clergy, but it doesn't matter. Abuse is
No, it doesn't. Right.
And what that type of abuse and trauma does is still so much of your life, because I didn't tell anyone. My husband and I have been married about almost 15 years, 16 on the 11th of June. And it was not until last summer that I really talked to him about some of the trauma in my life.
Mm-hmm.
For those that don't understand it, we find ways to cope. Let me tell you, we find ways to, I would say, for me, we find ways to live through it. I'll say it like that.
And it's not healthy.
And it's not healthy. We know our triggers, and we know how to
Mm-hmm.
manage our triggers. Trust me, we know how to manage our triggers.
Right.
And it spills over into our everyday lives, whether we want it to or not, because anything can trigger. Anything can be a trigger.
Right.
And those around us just don't know. My family just says that she's in one of her moods, and it's not a mood. It's something that's triggered. But even, I can't imagine, it just bothers me that the church is so, how can we, those of us that say we love Christ, tell anyone you've got to leave? When the church, God's true church, which is you, which is me, should be the one place that a wounded person should be able to find the healing, period.
I counsel victims, and so in my case, I was flat out just told, you need to leave the church. Today, churches can be a little more subtle. They'll say things to a victim, it might be best, we are welcome here, but it might be best if you find another church considering the circumstances. Or they'll say things like, you probably are uncomfortable here, and we understand that. So, we could help you find another church where you might want to attend someplace else. So there's subtle ways that they try to move the victim away from the church, or they just blatantly support the pastor in such a way that the victim has no choice but to leave.
Okay, you want to make me comfortable? Get up here and tell folk what this man did to me. I'll be real comfortable. I'm not uncomfortable at church, not if I know Christ. I'm uncomfortable with this situation.
Yes.
So, I mean, that's one of your questions. How do we deal with it as a church? I think we deal with it as honestly as Christ would have. We can offer forgiveness to that person, but you're the under shepherd, and you've done something that has probably altered a person's spiritual walk forever. So, excuse me. No, we don't get, why would we as a body, why are we supporting and moving somebody to another church to find another victim and another victim and another victim? So rather than just blatantly saying, look, by church, this is what has happened, period. That's
so
it.
In my case, I was his second victim. He had come to our church, and then another young woman from his first church came forward and accused him of sexually inappropriate behavior, which he didn't deny. He said he was sorry, he begged forgiveness, that it would never happen again. No information was given to the congregation. He was allowed to remain as our youth pastor, and within 3 months or so, he was kissing me in my hallway. So when we talk about forgiveness, you're right. We all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And that's one of the things that churches will often use to excuse this person's behavior. But forgiveness does not mean that there aren't consequences, and it doesn't mean that there aren't real damage done that needs to be addressed, both to the victim and to the perpetrator. He's probably ruined his family. He obviously has an issue or a problem that needs to be dealt with. And if we don't allow some kind of consequence for that behavior, then it continues. The behavior continues.
Of course it does.
And so what I say to,
wait, John, let me make myself clear, because I'm right along with no.
Yeah.
I can forgive you, but you
Right.
can't hold this role
No.
in any other church. There has to be a stopgap where you don't get to go and do this to another young woman and another young woman.
Right.
How are we solving the problem when we just literally move from one body to the other? And then you're not telling
Right.
the next church that this is what happened? Are
Right.
you serious?
So, ministry is a privilege. It's a privilege, not a right. And when
Thank
you have
you. Thank you.
crossed
It
the
is a
boundary,
privilege.
it's a privilege. And when you cross the boundaries of your ministry, whether it's complete sexual misconduct or sexual texting or inappropriate touching, you've crossed that boundary and you have lost the privilege of ministry. That doesn't mean you can't be forgiven, doesn't mean that someone can't give you help to find another position in another place in life, but you've lost the position of ministry by your own actions, not by any, no one is, they're removing you, but not because of something they've done, but of your own actions, you're being removed. The Bible talks about 27 times about wolves in sheep's clothing, 27 times.
Yes.
So this isn't something that, the one that I think most people are familiar with is Matthew 7:15. Beware of false prophets, which come to you in sheep's clothing, and the ravenous wolves. The shepherd is no longer a shepherd. He's proven he's a wolf. You're not going to change a wolf back to a shepherd or a sheep. He's a wolf in sheep's clothing. And yes, again.
Whoa. Y'all need to hear what she just said. I hope y'all heard what she said. You cannot change a wolf back into a shepherd. You cannot make a wolf back into a sheep.
And
that's just honest truth. And I think and it is our responsibility to hold the church, which is individuals. It is not a building. It is not about how many people give. It is not about how much tithes comes into the storehouse. It is about those that are sitting in those pews every Sunday. That's the church. Mm-hmm. And the right should be what should be given to the church is the right to say, this is what is going on with this person that we trusted. I'm sorry, with your children. Mm-hmm. Period. Mm-hmm. Full stop. There's no excuse for that. None whatsoever.
No. And think about this. If you had a church treasurer who was stealing money from the church,
what would you do?
Repeatedly, you would remove him immediately and you would demand that the money be paid back. These men steal souls. And we say to them, oh, well, everybody makes a mistake, or he's done so much good for the church. No, we wouldn't return the treasurer back to the church so that he could steal again. And again, they have proven who they are. This doesn't mean they are bad people all the way around. I mean, I would debate that maybe. But the point being, I think part of the problem is we have such a personal relationship with our pastors. They baptize us. They marry our children. They sit at our mother's bedside as she's dying. So we have this connection with them. So we don't want to see the truth. We don't want to believe that this person that we see as a perfectly good person would be capable of such heinous behavior. And yet they are, and we need to accept that. And the church is no different than any, look at the gymnasts, Boy Scouts, any place there are vulnerable. Yeah, it happens everywhere. So the church should not feel like this is a mark on them because they have a pastor who has done this. The mark comes on that church when they mishandle it. The mark comes on the church when they continue to allow him in ministry in any form. My pastor, who had a history of abuse, not just with me, it was before me, during the time with me, and he moved to the next church. He did it again with she was about 20 at that time. He's still a pastor. He is still a pastor.
Are you serious?
I am telling you the truth. I think he's semi-retired now. Now, let me add this to my story because I think it's important. My healing took a long time. It was a process. It didn't happen overnight. And I think anyone who's had any kind of hurt in their life, whether it's abuse or anything else, healing takes time. But one of the things that I felt I needed for my own healing was to confront him, because it was important for me to be able to look at him and say to him, I now know what you did to me. It was wrong and you had no right to do it. So I hired a private investigator and I located him ministering in a church in Alabama. I did. And
Sandy said, I'm coming for you, brother. I'm coming for you.
and that was a part of it, but most of it was about my needing to heal. And I couldn't, I didn't know if he was still alive, but I just wanted that satisfaction for me to be able to say to him, I know what you did. And this wasn't about love. This wasn't about God's will. This was all the lies you told me. And of course, he sat there and said how sorry he was, and he had an alcoholic father, and he had every excuse. Never once was he able to articulate and verbalize to me the damage he'd done. I don't think these men get it. I don't think they understand that he took my spiritual life and he contaminated it. He took my spiritual life and he twisted it. He created a disconnect between God and myself. That was the result of his sexual behavior. I had sex with this man in church, in his office. You can't, that's not something that you can separate and
Oh, he just didn't care.
No, this was, and that was, he always said, oh, I love you, I love you. And for me, it was important to be able to confront him. Now, I tell victims, this is not something for everyone, because confronting your abuser can be very emotionally damaging. You may not have the strength to do it, and your reasonings have to be such that you know why you want to confront them. And I would also say, go in, if you feel like you need to do that, you need to go in with very, very low expectations, because it's not going to give you satisfaction, or at least it didn't give me the complete satisfaction that I had hoped for. I wanted him to get it. And I knew he didn't get it, or he wouldn't still be in ministry, because a truly repentant man would understand the damage he's done and would never want to risk doing that again to anyone. Therefore, he would remove himself from ministry.
And that is repentance.
That is repentance.
That is what repentance is. Repentance is not just, oh, I'm so sorry, God. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to do it. Repentance is
action.
I'm turning away from that behavior. And if I need to remove myself from certain situations so that I don't do that again, which I don't need to be in ministry. I'm sorry. I know somebody's going to disagree, but for me, it is, if you're called, let me say it this way. If you're called, God will restore you.
Yes.
God will restore you.
And
if you're truly called, God will call you to a state of repentance and remorse that is so strong that you will remove yourself, get yourself some help. And when it is time, if God says it's time for you to be in that position again, you will come, but you will come so humble, and you will be so frank and so honest about the things that you've done. I'm sorry. There's no place in idea that you can send a person to another church.
No.
Oh my God.
And even I would caution with, someone who seems to be truly repentant, again, because just like an alcoholic who can be, sober for 20 years, that last one time takes another drink. These men are not safe to be in a church where there are vulnerable people. They're not safe to be around people who are broken, who are in need of help, where they can be preyed upon. And so, no. God will restore you to a point where you start some kind of ministry that's not within his body, where you can minister to other pastors that deal with that type of thing, or need help restoring or getting beyond that. But no. So when churches talk about, so many times you'll see churches say, well, we removed him from the ministry for a year and got him help. We're restoring him, so that he can return to his job. No, you know what the purpose of restoration is? The purpose is to restore that person back to Christ, not to his job. The church should be trying to restore that person back to Christ, not to his job. He's lost that privilege. If a stockbroker is found with inside trading, they lose their job, they lose their license. They never can be a stockbroker again, because the trust has been broken and you can't trust that person again. If I, as a nurse, am caught stealing narcotics, I lose my license.
You lose your license.
I lose my license.
A lawyer, he loses his license. A doctor, he loses his license.
Yes, exactly.
Period.
You cannot be a pastor and have sexual relationship with a member of your congregation any more than a doctor can have sex with their patient and still continue to be their doctor. You know, we talk about children and minors, and that is a no-brainer. That needs to be reported to the police, and that man needs to be removed immediately. But there's also the other side of it where there are adult women who have been taken advantage of by their pastors and sexually abused. And that is a hard concept for people to accept. I work with a ministry called the Hope of Survivors, and we deal with adult women who've been sexually abused by their pastors. And people will say, well, they're an adult. I mean, how can they be? But when you're vulnerable, and they're a sheep. That's right. And they're a sheep under his care. They are a sheep under his care. They are still God's children under this pastor's care. And so when a woman's in crisis and she comes to her pastor, he should be helping her, not adding to her brokenness and not adding to her problems by having any sexual contact with her. It is breaking the oath of his ordination vows. It's breaking the ethics of his profession. And let me just say, this is where I think churches fail. They only see it as a moral failing. They see it as a fall morally. They don't see it as a professional violation. So they want to forgive. They want to talk about scripture and how we've all sinned and that we shouldn't judge. That's the moral side. But the ethical, professional side is this. He broke the ethics of his profession. Therefore, he's removed from his profession.
Now that's a layman's way to understand that. I don't care. I'm with you 100%. I'm sorry, if you're out there and you disagree, fine. Ministry is a privilege. It is not. We are not entitled to be teachers. We're not entitled to be pastors. It is a privilege that God would call and choose to use us in that manner.
And I think
that's a privilege. That is not an honor. I mean, it's a privilege and an honor. It's not anything that
it's not a right.
It's not a right. I have no right to do anything.
I think if people understood, and this was one of the reasons I wrote the book, because I have a chapter called Spiritual Wounds. I think if people could even just get a small understanding of what spiritual abuse does to a person's spiritual life, you would never allow this man to have the opportunity to do that again to another person. You know, when the first victim came forward and my church knew about it, and they said, okay, we're going to forgive you. You promise you'll never do it again. What they were in essence saying, we're going to allow this man to continue in ministry and put every girl and every woman at risk in this congregation because he might do it again. We don't, he says he won't. We believe we're going to forgive him. But basically, they were going to allow us to be collateral damage so that this man could continue in ministry.
But you were collateral damage.
We were. And he proved himself that the pattern of behavior continued throughout his ministry. Now, when I confronted him, I asked him how many there had been through the years, and his answer was many, many. But then he said, but I got help, and I was identified as a sexual addict. Now, tell me, Pat, in whose world does it make sense for a pastor who has been identified as a sexual addict to be in any kind of ministry? And yet there he was sitting in a church. They were not aware of his past. I wrote 11 elders a letter, and I said, this is who I am. This is my concern for this man remaining in ministry. No one responded, not one.
Oh, wow.
Ignored me, because that's easier to do. Ignore the victim. Now, I then went to his supervisor was in the meeting when I went to meet with him, and his supervisor was aware there'd been some issues in the past, but he had no idea of details or how many or what the situations were. I looked at him and I said to him, how can you trust this man that this is not going to happen again? And his answer was, well, God changes people. A changed person would remove himself. That's the answer to that. And so I had so many concerns with this man remaining in ministry. I got a 3-page letter from his supervisor telling me that I was going to ruin this church, that I should feel guilty, that I will ruin the spiritual lives of an entire congregation if I continue to pursue this. That's blaming the victim, and it's putting the guilt all back on me again.
No. If something happens within your body, then you will be responsible for ruining the spiritual lives of your congregation.
Yeah,
Because first of all, why is not the first response? I'm sorry, you're gonna have to step down.
Yeah.
I'm
And
sorry.
why are you, and if you feel, and again, he was so charismatic and he was so dynamic. I mean, it's easy to see how he could suck people in and how they would want him to be his pastor, their pastor. But why then do you have the right to even keep that information from the congregation? If you feel like he needs to be the minister of this church, then keeping your congregation in the dark is an absolutely wrong. You can't do that. Mrs. Smith, sitting in the third row, has a right to make that decision for herself if she wants her daughter or her sister
Son.
around.
Or anybody.
Son, anybody around
Son,
this
anybody.
man. Anybody. That information should not be kept from the congregation. And so when I informed the elders, I expected there would be some dialogue. I expected that someone would say to me, you know, I'm sorry this happened to you, but it was 27 years ago. So, you know, we think that I got nothing. I got an absolute nothing. Do not even respond to this person because we don't want to talk about it.
Well, I tell you what, I don't know about anybody else. It sickens me. And I'm not judging because it's not judgmental to say that there has got to be a standard in the house of God.
So
it's
here's
not
the thing.
when I'll tell you where I think we mess up. When we believe that it's our church, we make those type of decisions.
Mm-hmm.
But when we understand that this is his house and we must live our lives and run the body must be maintained by his standard, and what is wrong is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You can use David all day. Of course, David did what he did with Bathsheba. David was called into account and made to be accountable, take responsibility for his actions. And the consequence was that he lost a child.
Mm-hmm.
But David was repentant,
Mm-hmm.
truly repentant. Because what did he say? I've sinned against you and you only. So the repentance comes in knowing that I've done something that is so egregious to God that I need to step down and I need to get myself some help. And I can't come back in this particular role because I have an issue. How is that so hard to understand? It is just like.
And when people talk about, well, we shouldn't judge. Well, here's what I say to that. My abuser, I'm not judging his soul. I'm not judging whether or not God is going to forgive him, or I'm not judging whether he's in good favor with. What I am judging is his ability to do his job. I'm not judging his soul. I'm judging his ability to do his job as a pastor. And by his actions, he proved that he is incapable.
He's proven that he's incapable of doing
his job.
That's
what I'm judging. That's what I'm judging. I'm judging his ability to do his job. And that happens in churches all the time. Where you judge, whether this pastor hasn't met our expectations, so we're going to, remove him. Or this pastor doesn't quite meet where we thought he would do, so we're going to ask if he'd like to step down. So we judge pastors all the time based on their job performance. It's just when this happens, some reason we feel like the church needs to say, oh, we have to forgive this person, and we can't. He's lost. This is a mistake. He made a mistake. It's not a mistake. Believe me, these aren't mistakes. These men know exactly what they're doing.
I just feel like and somebody correct me if you're wrong. I just feel like the church just as a whole. I'm not talking about any particular church. I'm not talking about your church or mine. In the church as a whole, the global church has an issue dealing with certain things, period. We just act as if it's not happening. Sexual abuse, whether it's a pastor or anybody else, is not happening. Anything that has to do with certain things that make us uncomfortable as a body, we don't want to deal with. Why? Well, we're going to have to acknowledge to everybody else that there are those within the body that have issues. We all have issues.
Right.
So we're just like the church is nothing but a body of an entity made up of imperfect people who have the ability to make mistakes, to falter, and to fail. That is who we are. We cannot avoid it. There are no perfect people sitting in the pews.
Right.
So there's that is why we have so many sitting in the body of Christ dealing with issues that they won't take to the pastor, that they won't talk to anybody else about, because they feel like they must live up to this standard of perfect or super holy, when that is not the case. Those men and women behind the pulpit, myself included, are capable of failing you. Don't put the onus on me. Keep your mind, keep your focus on who God is, who Jesus is, and what is his standard. And when I don't meet that standard, then you have the right to come to me and say, you're failing in this area according to the word, not according to what I say or I think, but according to the word, period.
Right.
You failed. Now, if you need to take a sabbatical, if it's something that can be corrected in that way, if you need to take a sabbatical, maybe you need to go rest, maybe you need to go renew, get yourself renewed and refreshed in the word, fine. But this has got to be treated like we would treat any other sexual predator, period.
Right.
Point blank.
And as I said, any other profession, there are professional boundaries that cannot be crossed. And when you cross those boundaries, you lose your ability to practice that profession, whether it's a doctor, a teacher, a counselor. You cannot cross those boundaries of your profession. You know, as a stockbroker, you can have all the affairs you want to have. You can do whatever you want in that regard, and you're not going to get fired. But you can't do inside trading, because that's part of your profession that deals with trust and deals with people's livelihood. Same with pastors. There's ethics and boundaries that cannot be crossed. They cannot be crossed. And once they are, and I don't think we can say it enough, Pat, you've lost the privilege of ministry.
In that capacity. I can't tell you who's going to do what you once you leave the position of under shepherd.
Right.
But in that capacity, come on, man. You think we got to think about how
the shepherd is a wolf. The shepherd has proven that he's a wolf. He has harmed and devoured, and it's Matthew 7:15. They devour one of the sheep. And that's what it felt to me. I was being devoured by this man who claimed to be a shepherd when he was a wolf in sheep's clothing. And that trust and what he did to my spiritual life changed and altered me forever. And it took me years to come to grips with how my spiritual life will look now as opposed to how it looked then. And it's never going to be the same. It can't be the same. Just like abuse that you suffered, your life is the same. Your life is altered by that act. And it is, I tell victims, and when they're at the lowest point in their lives, I said, look, this will always be a part of your life, but it doesn't have to define your life. And so moving forward is going to be difficult. You're going to have triggers, but it's like you said, you manage those triggers. When you understand why, for 27 years, I had that knot in my stomach walking past a minister's office. Once I began to understand why I had that feeling, it made it easier for me to say, okay, this is why. And I don't have that anymore. I have other triggers, but I don't have that one anymore. And so, it's so important, again, for people to understand the damage that this does. And it not only affects my life, it affected my children's spiritual life. They didn't have the mother they would have had this not been done to me. My two children never had a bedtime prayer with their mother. I couldn't do it. I could not pray. I didn't pray for 27 years. And I was someone who led prayer groups. I read my Bible every single day for 27 years. The Bible I carried to school with me in high school sat on a shelf for 27 years and was never opened. And that's what he did to me. That's what he did to me. And you're to your point when you say, if you've never been there, you don't understand it. People will say, well, God didn't move, you moved, and God's still there. Yes, but the contamination and the hurtfulness that happened to me under the guise of spirituality and under the guise of this man being a man of God traumatized me to a point that I had a very difficult time finding my way back spiritually.
Well, for those people that say God didn't move, well, then we know he doesn't, because he has promised he will never leave us nor forsake us. But at the same time, my answer to them would be, no, he didn't. But because of his grace and because of his unconditional love, He allowed me to return to him. He never took his hand off of me.
Right.
He allowed me in his time, because I can say, and you can say, well, it took this long for me to do this. And it took, no, I know how many years I asked God to explain to me, why did this happen to me? Why did you write this as a part of my life story? And I did not get an answer. I understand now that I would not have handled the answer when I was asking the question.
I think that's a great point.
When it was time for me, when I was at a point in my life where I really truly had said, I need this soul healing. I'm carrying this with me and I need to be whole. He knew then I was ready to be healed. So, I mean,
that's exactly how I felt. This was something, like I said, for 27 years, I kept it from my husband and my family. And at that point, at 27 years, I thought, I'm going to go to my grave with this. Nobody's going to find out. They haven't found out by now. They're not going to find out. And this is great. And I had this moment on driving down to, one of my daughter's golf. Chapter 1, I talk about driving my daughter's golf tournament. And I passed the sign to the city to where he moved after leaving our church. And I just broke down. And it was God telling me, we're going to deal with this now. And I was at a point. I was at a point in my life. Yeah.
And when he said it's time,
because I kept thinking, okay, I'm stuffing this back down. I'm not going to deal with this.
Yep.
And for 2 solid weeks, I was totally in a mess. And I just thought, okay, I'm going to have to figure out what I need to do about this. And I was fortunate enough to have a couple good friends who were very spiritual and who were very involved in their church. And so they were very, very just instrumental in helping me move. And they didn't push me. That's the other thing I try to tell, Christians and people of faith. Be very careful when you talk to people who've been sexually abused in the church, because things like prayer and Bible reading that are comforting to you can be triggers.
Triggers for them.
It won't be. So so they say, well, what should we say? Well, the first thing is what you said to me. Just simply say you're sorry this happened, because we need to know that people care and that they understand, and it should have never happened to us. So I say you're sorry that it happened, and then you listen without judgment, because you're going to find some victims might say to you, I don't believe in God anymore. And for Christians, that's hard to take.
Yeah.
But that's where they may be at that point. And your acceptance of that is telling them, okay, she didn't turn away. She didn't yell at me. She didn't try to convince me there was a God. They feel safe with you at that point. They feel safe enough then to share the most intimate part of their story. And so I tell people, instead of saying to someone, I'll pray for you, if they're a victim of clergy abuse, maybe it would be better to say, I know prayer can be difficult. Would it be all right if I pray for you? And accept the answer, yes or no. And so that, I just, in a well-meaning way, Christians tend to do more harm sometimes to a victim of clergy abuse than they mean to. And so one of my goals is to help them understand how to respond to a victim of clergy abuse.
Yeah, because it's totally different. First of all, if they've trusted you enough to come to you, number one, this is my thinking. Well, I know you're mad, you're upset, but there's some part of him that's still in you that led you to me. And I'm just going to take it for what it is right now, and whatever you're willing to discuss or talk about right now, that's where we'll start. And that's it, because I already know. I know what you're going to say. You don't trust God. You don't do this and this. And this is way too soon in any conversation for me to say, well, don't say that. Or no, that's not true. Or, well, no, don't say, no, don't say, you don't want to hear that God stuff. Yeah, that's where they are right now. Because this is the effect of clergy abuse.
And I tell them
not only have you hurt me, this is the thinking of the victim. Not only have you hurt me,
God has
now I can't trust God to do what everybody said he would do, which would be to protect me.
And one of the things I had one victim say to me, I don't believe in God anymore. I just don't believe in God anymore. And I just said to her, I said, you know what? God is a big enough God that he can take that for right now. And he understands why you feel that way. And so I let her feel that. She needed to feel that anger initially. Not all victims feel that way. I never never blamed God, because I always knew that this was a person who did some evil acts to me, but it did affect my life in church because of triggers and I couldn't pick up a Bible because I could remember him reading Bible verses. I couldn't pray because I felt the times I was in church, I heard him praying. I couldn't pray because I saw him praying. And that's where my disconnect came. And I will tell you this, I mourned the loss of my spiritual life during those 27 years. I longed to be able to sit in church and sing the hymns. I longed to be able to take communion and feel that connection. I longed to be able to teach Sunday school again. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. And so for me, I was sad when I saw people singing in the choir and knew that I used to do that. And I can't do it any longer. I couldn't.
Are you there now?
I'm closer. I'm still hesitant a little bit. I don't have the triggers in church like I did. And I certainly pray now. I do read my Bible now. What I still struggle with is when someone will say, well, the Bible says. That's a trigger for me. I pull back, because it's almost as if I hear him saying it's God's will, and this is way, your love for me is helping me in my ministry. And so that's still a trigger for me, but I'm very much, so much farther along than I ever was. So yeah, church, but every now and then I will have a breakdown in church. It happened about 6 months ago. I attended a funeral, and it happened to be in not the same church I grew up in, but it was the same denomination. And everything was so familiar to me that it was really difficult for me to get through the service on that one. But the thing is, I understand why. I understand. Where years ago, it was an anxiety attack. Now it's I say trauma doesn't bring back memories. Trauma brings back the action.
Yeah.
And that's the difference. It's not just a memory. It's a physical reaction that can occur at times.
It is. And that's how I knew I was healed. That's how I knew I was healed, because I was at a point where I could retell it and not relive it.
Right.
Whereas
exactly.
I was not there. I was not there. I could not. I was like you. I could not get beyond. Okay, I don't even. Let's not even deal with this. Let's just shove it right back under wherever it needs to go.
Right. Which is what a lot of victims do.
But now, being able to retell it and not relive it is just.
It's free.
A piece I can't understand. I cannot explain how sweet that is. So I'm listening, and I can almost understand why at some point you would still be not ready for corporate worship. And for those of you that don't understand what corporate worship is, that's the gathering and fellowship within a physical building with several other people, with several other believers. Because I would imagine that would be a trigger, but as long as I don't even have to tell you that, because of what he's doing with that incident for you, using you to help others, that is a piece that is going to come in its own time. And God knows when that timing is. Nobody else can say when it is.
And I can see, like I said, the progress. I see the progress, and I see it. And I don't have that sadness that I once had. So there's joy in my life with my spiritual life that I didn't have. And yeah, you're right. It's God's timing. And the ministry that I work with, that's my ministry now. And so I feel, one of the saddest things for me, as I remember through the years, is I wasn't involved in church at all and not doing anything. I remember thinking, I'm going to get to heaven and I'm never going to hear the words, well done, thy
good and faithful servant.
And it was sad. I thought, I'm not going to hear that because I'm not done anything to serve God. And now I know that, yes, this is a ministry. I mean, this is something, as we talked earlier, we need to discuss it. We need to find healing for victims. We need to find healing for churches. I mean, this affects an entire church. When the pastor or the rabbi or the priest is found guilty of sexual misconduct, the whole church suffers, and that's the people within. So, I just know that this is something, it's not something I planned. I certainly didn't think this is where I would.
Look, we never do.
Take me.
We never do.
You're right.
We don't plan it. Look,
God takes care of it.
I just feel like God is so gracious to us that he knows how to turn our messes into powerful messages. And that's all it's for. When when you reach that point in the journey where you understand that no matter what has happened, it's all happened for me to share and to help someone else. It has never been about me.
Because our stories are powerful. Our stories are powerful and can be healing for others. And that's, why you feel the need and I feel the need to share our stories, because we're going to touch someone's life with our own story. And I remember thinking, what if I'd heard someone's story when this abuse was happening to me? Would have given me maybe the courage to go forward, would have given me the courage to tell someone. I wouldn't have felt alone, because and I'm sure you felt the same way. You feel like this has never happened to anybody else, or it didn't happen the way it's happened to me, and I'm alone in this, and I got the only bad apple in the barrel. And had I known that this had happened to someone else, maybe it would have changed the direction of the abuse. I don't know, but I know that our stories need to be told.
Period. The stories need to be told. And I'm sorry, y'all, we have got to stop waiting for famous folk to tell their stories before we come out of the woodworks and start talking about some real life stuff that's going on with real life folk every single day, sitting in our churches, hurting and broken. And we have the ability, if we had that mindset, to open the door for these type of conversations. I mean, nothing's hidden from God. That's bottom line.
Right.
Nothing's hidden from God, but we've got to be more welcoming. That's those that are in leadership, our under shepherds, and those that are in leadership must have hearts that are so visible, the hearts of Christ, that is so visible that when someone is hurting, that they feel that they can come. And I think that's why we don't come, because we feel like we can't come. We feel like we are constantly being raised to a standard of perfection, that if I say something is wrong, or if I'm hurting or whatever, then somebody's going to question either my walk with Christ or if I'm really saved. Yeah, I'm saved. I'm just hurting. Yeah, I'm saved, but I'm being abused. Yes, I'm saved, but ... so many other things. So I think it is our personal, each and every one of us, it is our responsibility to make a decision that we are going to live lives as believers that imitate Christ, not our pastor, imitate Christ, period. So that others may feel welcome or open to come and talk to those that ought to be there for them. It's just frustrating for me. And maybe it's because our church is so small that I am blessed that we are just like family, period. So we're blessed with that foundation. So I'm always so naive when it comes to hearing stories like yours, where a church would literally put the victim out and move the abuser to another church. That is crazy. I can't wrap my mind around that. And you're going to have brothers, I mean, y'all can get mad if you want to, but you're going to have to give me some scripture. You're going to have to put some word on that and tell me how that works, because I don't think you can. I know you cannot.
Now, let me say, I also went back to the church, my home church, that didn't ask me to leave. And I wanted them to know the truth and what really occurred with this person. And they were very gracious in allowing me to come. And let me say, that's not common. Most churches will respond with, well, this was something that happened before we were here, or this was so long ago that we don't feel like it's a need to address it at this point. They were very gracious in allowing me to come. And I didn't spare them any forgiveness in the beginning, I should say, as much as I told them the truth. I told them they had no right to do what they had done to me. And even though none of them were there at the time, I still felt it was important for the healing of that church to acknowledge what was done to me, why that church was wrong. And they did. And they welcomed me back into the church anytime I wanted to return. So they acknowledged that pain, and they acknowledged the damage that was done. And so I'm very appreciative of that. But as I said earlier, churches still continue to suggest to victims that they move to another church, or they don't support them in such a way that they feel comfortable staying at that church. The victim blaming continues to this day with so many people that I talk to. And I find that to be, I mean, I don't understand why the concept of this man is in a position of power. He's in a position of privilege. He's representing God. That when he crosses those boundaries, why it's so difficult for them to give support to the person he harmed and not to the perpetrator.
I don't understand it, because the young lady I spoke to, this happened to her. It was not 20 years ago. It was recent.
Right.
And she was asked to leave the church.
Yeah.
It just blows my mind. She was asked to leave the church, and
Yeah.
nothing was done to the under shepherd or the pastor. So I'm flabbergasted. Please come back. Please, I already extended you an invitation. You are welcome, welcome, welcome. I know we just barely delved into this. So you are welcome to come back, and let's do another part 2 to this that can be done on Beyond the Porch, where we can really, really talk about seriously, because we need to talk about, which we did not get to, the impact that this had on your family when you finally opened up and told your family what had happened.
There's a lot to my story. The book takes a lot of twists and turns that are kind of very surprising turns. But
Yep. And y'all need to know that twists and turns is what that's called. Twist and turn is what that's called. But
if anyone's interested, if anyone's interested in my book, it is available on Amazon. I also have a website that I think for people who would like to learn more about clergy abuse. It's just my name. It's sandyphillipskirkham.com. I think there's a bibliography in the back of my book for people who would like to have some other books that they might find helpful. That's the book.
Yep.
And
wow, let me pray on. When I saw the cover, I was like, what? Wolf, she did that. She was calling that.
Yeah.
Call it what it is. Call it what it is.
I actually had the title of the book before I actually wrote the book, because I just thought that's exactly what he did. He said he would pray with me, and instead he prayed upon me.
He prayed. That book cover, that cover got me. I was like, wait a minute, what? That's a wolf, and that's oh, okay. Now I get it. So she will be back, but you will not be able to hear part 2 of this conversation unless you are a subscriber to Porch Talk through Zippy Streams. That's ZIPISTREAM. That's where you get beyond the porch conversations that are real and raw. And if you're not ready for that, don't subscribe. I'm telling you, don't subscribe if you're not ready for it, because it's just me on the porch and us just talking about real life issues for real in real time. So if you're interested in that, please subscribe to the Porch Talk on Zippy Stream, and look forward to hearing more from Miss Sandy, but also get the book. Let me say this, honestly, if you know someone who has been through this, even if you don't want the book, get the book and share it with that person. Share the website so that that person can at least know that there are other people out there that they can reach out to. If you don't understand it, then guide and lead that person and direct that person to someone who does. That's the best we can do. Because if you are not equipped to counsel or to help a person through this situation, at least lead them to somebody that can. That's the best thing you can do for them. I promise you, that's the best thing you can do for them. So see you all right back here on the porch next week. Join me next week again. No telling what we'll be talking about. Be blessed, and as always, be a blessing to someone else. See you all next week.